Over the last 6 years, I've reviewed a whole bunch of different wheel brands on the channel, but this is the first one from PXN I've tested to date. So this is of interest to me and maybe to you too. Specs wise, the wheelbase torque output peaks at 3.1 Newton meters. It includes a 3-pedal pedal set and a manual shifter. The V99 is compatible with PC and both Xbox and PlayStation consoles. Do note, my testing is on PC only, so I won't be able to give any feedback on how well it runs console games. On spec, the V99 is going up against entry-level Logitech and Thrustmaster wheels, and the V99 remains the cheapest of this lineup, so potentially this could be the better budget option. Hopefully I'll have that answer by the end of the video. The first thing we're going to do is take a detailed tour around the V99 and then onto the track for the testing and evaluation. The first notable feature is the quick release system for attaching the steering wheel to the wheelbase. That would imply there may be other add-on steering wheels available, but that doesn't appear to be the case, at least at the time of making this video, though it still could be useful to break it down for storage when not in use. The steering wheel attaches tightly, there's no looseness. There is some flex if you apply lateral force. After all, the steering column is made from plastic parts. I will say though, flex is not noticeable in use, it feels solid. The included round steering wheel is 300mm in diameter, covered with a grippy rubberized material. On the flip side are micro-switched paddle shifters, and below these are dual analog clutch paddles. The wheelbase is a plastic shell bolted to a metal frame. The cables plug into the rear of the wheelbase. This switch swaps the steering wheel angle input between 270 and 900 degrees. The wheelbase angle is fully adjustable. Underneath the metal plate are rubber pads. These are the table clamps. The broad metal plate and chunky clamps provide a secure fit. The pedals and base are plastic. The pedals are spring tensioned using Hall sensors for the linear input. Rubber feet provide grip, and there are also 4 hard mount points. A feature easily overlooked, the pedals are adjustable for height and angle. The final piece of hardware in the bundle is the PXN shifter. It's quite similar to the Logitech driving force shifter in fact. In style and features, we get 6 gears plus reverse. Reverse gear is engaged by pushing down on the knob and then into 6th gear, where there's a lower ledge to catch the lever and a separate active switch. The first thing I'd expect to do when installing a new wheelbase is to download the drivers, but the V99 requires no drivers. This surprised me as I did search on their website looking for them initially, but all you need to do is plug in the wheelbase, power it on, and it will be recognised by Windows and games. But without its own dedicated software, how do you adjust the wheelbase settings? Mostly you do that in the game settings. But there's also the PXN wheel app. It connects over Bluetooth and provides the basic settings for adjusting the core features. Moving the sliders applies the changes in real time, so you can do this while on track if you wish. The app can also save presets, so you can have a bank of different settings for all your games. What immediately impressed me about the PXN V99 is how keenly priced it is, particularly with the inclusion of the shifter that by itself is sold for £50. The V99 bundle, wheel, pedals and shifter is currently listed on Amazon UK for £209. On paper, that's really good value. But how does the V99 perform? I'll move on to that in a moment, but before that I do want to point out some other standout features besides the price. Being able to change the angle of the wheelbase is so very useful, and the pedal adjustments is great to see too. This is unique for a product of this price point. Normally these would be features only present on more expensive hardware, and it does make a big difference. It helps you work the hardware around you and your setup rather than the compromise of the other way round, which is typical when looking at these cheaper products. So props to PXN, it's really helpful to have these adjustments. The table clamp is super solid, it's the most robust I've used on an entry level wheel. Build quality seems good, it's certainly up there with the established brands it's competing against, plus some extra features that exceed the competition. Everything seems solid and put together well. That's my initial perspective of handling the hardware outside of testing performance. But first impressions count, and so far there's plenty of positives. You may notice that in some footage the steering wheel doesn't appear to be centred when I'm driving straight down the track, and you would be correct, it is slightly off. And there is no way to correct this. The wheel runs a calibration procedure every time it's powered on, and the outcome is the same, this slight off angle position, and there's no other manual process to adjust the wheel centre. So I'm stuck with this slight skew. It doesn't affect control, so although the wheel angle is not centred, this is the actual wheel angle I need to maintain to drive in a straight line, and it does work, but it's not ideal of course. So I'm able to continue this review as it didn't impede my testing, and it's not noticeable while cornering. I am hoping this is just an anomaly and not a common issue. This is a review unit, so I'm not going to rage about it, but if I had spent my own money on this, I definitely would return it for an exchange, because it is an imperfection that would bother me. If you own a PXN V99, do drop a comment, let me know how yours is running and if you have the same problem or not. And by the way, it does appear that my V99 is running the latest firmware. Internally, the wheelbase runs two motors that are connected to the steering wheel column via helical gears. This is the same arrangement used by Logitech, and it's fair to say the outcome is very similar as far as the feel of the force feedback and wheel friction, though the V99 is more powerful than the Logitech wheelbase is, but some of that advantage is certainly cancelled out by the larger and heavier V99 steering wheel. But I do prefer this 300mm size, and a round wheel is more versatile than the D-shaped wheel Logitech has adopted. We also have clutch paddles, so that's quite a bonus too. There's no way to sync the clutch paddles together and set a biting point on one of them to make them function as a proper dual clutch paddle setup. They are independent analog inputs, so not perfect, but you can still use one of them as a clutch, and maybe you could map the handbrake to the other. Unlike my Logitech G29, the PXN V99 does not suffer from the infamous wheel centre dead zone, and there's less noise rattle from the cogs. Not completely silent, there is the odd rattle here and there when you ride the car over a curb, but it's not too bad. There's light friction when turning the wheel. That's feedback from the cog mechanism. It feels like tiny bumps. It's the same for the G29, and it's not unexpected as the V99 is a copy of that internal design. The force feedback quality is typical entry-level force feedback. That again I would express its similarity to the Logitech G29. To be certain, I did run a few laps with my G29 to get a comparison. The PXN wheel torque is noticeably more powerful than the G29. That was really clear. Effects come through with more vigour. The force feedback detail, well, the G29 wins. It picks up a few more track details and the wheel feels a little bit smoother. It's not massively different, but the delivery of force feedback is slightly more refined from the G29, though it also rattles more and it also has the resistance centre dead zone, where the V99 rattles less and no dead zone. Force feedback of this calibre or any entry-level wheelbase doesn't match the fidelity of higher-end wheels. This is more basic, but if you've never used a force feedback wheel before, you will find it immersive and enjoyable. There's a good measure of counterforce weight resistance felt through the wheel when rotating the car, and strong effects like curbs, road bumps, going off track and collisions come through well, shaking the steering wheel. There's a fair sense of what's happening to the car. I found the V99 perfectly capable handling my casual racing games and dipping into sim racing titles. The pedals are good size for adult feet, the pedal springs are quite strong and the pedal motion is long. Both are characteristics I want from my pedals, so I'm happy with that. It was necessary to place weights behind the pedals to stop them from slipping forward. That's the result of pushing into the strong pedal springs. But I'd rather have these firm pedals than lightweight feeling ones. Pedal feedback is important for controlling the inputs precisely. PXN got it right here by using robust springs. So be prepared to deal with securing the pedals if they are going to be placed loose on the floor. If you have a wheel stand to mount them to, then that won't be a problem. Pedals bundled with cheaper wheels can be hit and miss, some can be utterly terrible and others are pretty reasonable. And I would place these in the pretty reasonable category. The way I judge this is simply by the car control I have with those pedals. I did not struggle with these, so they get a pass. The PXN A7 shifter is best described as a slightly better version of the Logitech driving force shifter, where the tension is a smidgen stronger here and a top plate that directs the lever more accurately to the destination, reducing the likelihood of misshifting. It's a decent shifter, I can't complain about. It's a practical device that's a good fit with the rest of the hardware. On the PXN website, the V99 is labelled as a new product. That may be the case, but in reality it is not technically leaps ahead in performance versus other entry-level hardware that already exists from Thrustmaster and Logitech, essentially competing against the established brands at a lower price point, plus some additional features to make the V99 stand out from the crowd, such as the shifter, clutch paddles, and some adjustments the others don't offer. And don't forget the 3.1 Newton meters of torque. Power does matter. In some areas the V99 is better than those others. Its only weakness being the force feedback detail isn't quite as good. The difference is marginal, so it's not a deal breaker, but these things need to be said. There's no argument the PXN V99 bundle offers good value for money, putting itself forward as a potential alternative to the usual suspects that most people would consider first when looking to buy a budget racing wheel setup. Reliability over the long term isn't something I'm able to test here, so that remains to be established. But there's no obvious weakness in the build quality, it seems on par with other wheels I've reviewed in the past. Does the PXN V99 offer enough to make it a worthwhile buy over a G29? Probably not. I do like a lot of things about the V99, but at the end of the day, I know a G29, even with its own limitations, is going to always work with every game I throw at it, and it's reliable hardware. So sticking with the mainstream is still the best way forward for most of us. That's what I'd sensibly spend my money on, even if it costs a bit more for the privilege, and arguably getting less hardware for my money. But I'm not going to trash the V99 in this video. It ran well for me, and I had a decent time with it. At the end of my testing, my only concern is the offset wheel angle that I wasn't able to address. That hopefully isn't a common factor, as that would spoil an otherwise well-balanced bundle. The wheelbase is responsive, the shifter is quite good, and the pedals are pretty reasonable. There's no duds here for me to complain about. So yes, this is the best value starter setup to get up and running with, but has the difficult task of convincing people to get on board when the mainstay of established brands remain the go-to safe option.